Hey y'all, I'm Elisa and I am the Scrappy Wife behind scrappywife.com, and today I have an art journaling process video for you. The name of the game today is going to be Layers. So I'm going to work with some Jane Davenport mermaid markers. I have some Tim Holtz tissue wrap, a Jane Davenport well-loved paper pack right here. And I am just going to start working and building and seeing what comes out of this art journal page. So I will put you on fast forward. As always, all the supplies are linked below if you are interested, and let's see what happens. Let's go. The first thing that I'm going to do is prep my pages with Liquitex Matte Gel Medium, and I'm doing it for a couple of reasons. First of all, on the back side of one of these pages is an art journal entry that will be really sensitive to water. It's all water reactive mediums on the other side, and so I don't want any of the water that I plan to use on this page to affect the other art journal page. And second of all, I wanted to seal up this paper and really make it easy for the colors and the water that I'm planning. I wanted to make it easy for it to blend and move on the page, and so I used my matte gel medium to prep the page and seal it up. The reason that I'm using the matte gel medium instead of gesso is that honestly the gesso that I currently have I very much don't like. It's super gritty and I don't like the feel of it on the page, and I happen to have a humongous container and I rarely use it, and I'm trying to not buy until I use up what I have, which really just isn't going to work. So I really need to just pick I really like the Art Basics gesso. I'm not sure what kind you guys use, but I have the Liquitex gesso and I don't like it. I don't like the grit. I don't like what it feels like. I much prefer a smoother finish, which is why I'm using the matte gel medium in this case. As you can see, I am using my Jane Davenport mermaid markers to add color to the page. The ink in these, the ink is super saturated. It is very colorful, very dark. So what I'm doing is putting it a little bit on the edge of the page and then adding water with my mini mister to help it move, help it blend. And then right here, I'm using just a plain water brush to kind of bring out the color, slowly bring it to the edge of the page. And then you can see I'm letting it blend. I stuck with the three primary colors, that bright pink and a yellow and a blue. I realized pink is not a primary, but close enough to red, because I wanted to see how the colors would mix and hopefully start forming some greens and purples in here, and that starts to happen. I'm trying to be really patient. Sometimes I rush through my art journal pages. I am just trying to get them done. I just want it to be finished, and I don't really give it time to develop. So on this particular day, I'll be honest, this is going to be a longer video. I spent a good almost 2 hours on this art journal page, which normally I don't really have the time to do that, but it was a lot of fun. It was fun doing it. It was fun letting the page kind of evolve on its own and not forcing it. And so when you have the time, I highly recommend just slowing down a little bit in your art journaling. I had a great time seeing how all of these would start to mix together. You can see I'm kind of bringing in pieces, drying in between layers when I'm kind of happy with that layer, letting it work, just being patient and watching the color kind of do its thing. These mermaid markers are so fun to work with, to play with, and I really liked some of the impressions I started to get on this page. Once I was pleased with the color in the background of this page, I made sure to dry it thoroughly, and then I'm going to start some more of the layering process. So this is some collage paper from Tim Holtz, and I am just going to tear pieces. I'm trying to aim primarily for words. I don't really want the music notes so much or the pictures, so I'm aiming to pull off some of those words. I do end up with some music notes, which are better than the bold butterfly that is part of that particular piece of paper, but I'm using those pieces. I'll cut off one final little piece because I like odd groupings, so 5, and then the same matte gel medium, put some underneath, some on top, and they just melt into the page. So they are great for collaging, for adding some texture and depth to your art journal pages. And again, this is another layer. Like I said, I really wanted to work with layering and just seeing what I could create when I really took the time and paid attention to some of the details. So I'm trying to make sure these have really good coverage. I'll come back and trim off the pieces that are hanging over the edge and then let that whole piece dry. So here I am, I'm going to trim it off and then bring back my heat tool, which got a lot of action on this particular day, to let it dry. It's really good to, if you're able to let things air dry, if you work in your art journal in steps. I know several people that have multiple art journals. which I think is a fantastic idea. And they kind of work in multiples because they put one aside and let it dry, and they're working in the other one, and then they come back to a page. I prefer to just stick to one page, which is why my heat tool ends up getting a pretty good workout when I'm art journaling. So I have had this Jane Davenport paper collection, I guess you'll call it, paper pad, in my collection for over a year now. I love it. It is so fun to work with. It's super awesome. So I cut this girl out. I'm almost done. I'm gonna have to go ahead and see if I can find where to order another pack because I have just really I enjoy her artwork anyway, and it's really fun to incorporate into my own journaling pages. And even though it's bold and pretty distinctive of Jane Davenport, I think that they are still customizable pieces personally. They work within my style, I guess. So I'm adhering this girl. She hangs off over the edge, so I'll trim that up. And I'm really making sure it's a pretty thick cardstock actually that it's printed on. So I'm trying to make sure all the edges are sealed down really nicely. I'll trim off her little legs right there. And I think her coloring goes perfect with what I have going on the page already. Now I put this on super fast forward because I didn't want you guys to just have to watch me play around. But what I'm doing is, again, playing with those mermaid markers, bringing in color, mixing them, covering over some of the tissue paper that I have on the paper. It kind of incorporates it even more, even though the color comes through the tissue paper. Putting color on top adds another layer and another dimension. And I'm just having fun kind of playing with it, making sure everything is becoming part of the page and nothing is just standing out on its own besides the girl. And I will be working on incorporating her in a different manner in a minute. So again, just blending, playing, paying attention to the detail, and then making sure it is completely dry. Right now I'm super speedy putting some powder on because I plan to use some embossing ink. So I have seen the Distress Resist spray and I would love to get some. I haven't gotten some yet, but I'm going to do a similar technique but with embossing. So this is my embossing ink pad. I'm putting it through the stencil and then pressing it the other side that got all inky, and then I'm flipping it over again and I will be putting it through the stencil right here, and same technique, flipping it over because that got inky and pressing it down on that side. So I've put clear embossing ink down on my page. I have clear embossing powder that I am just sprinkling over. I use up my whole, I'm messy. I'm the only one that's messy with embossing powder. It got everywhere. So there's half of the page with the embossing powder. I knock off some of the extra. You can see, you can just use your finger if it gets in parts that you didn't want it on. And then I'm using that I just knocked off to cover up the last little bit of ink that is on the page. And I will knock all of this off. It gets all over the place, so I actually have to pause the camera and clean up here in a minute. And I pull out a dry brush to kind of scrape this off down here in the corner because I didn't want that there, some of the extra stuff that stuck. The reason for putting the baby powder down with the EK Success tool was to try to prevent that from happening, but it wasn't perfect. Did my best preserving the rest of that powder. And now super fast forward, I am coming with the Ranger heat tool and heating up that embossing powder. It is clear, so once it heats up you can't really see it except for a shine, but the idea here is to create a resist. And if I had the resist spray, then that would work in the same way, but I don't have that, and so I'm using what I have, trying to avoid going out to buy new products just for the sake of a technique, because I think a lot of times you can repeat a technique with a different kind of product and still end up with a pretty a close imitation. Now that all of the embossing powder is melted, I'm coming back with some Dylusion shimmer spray and I'm spraying it on the corners. It ended up being a little heavy right there. I pull up my paper towel roll. I'm knocking some of it off because you can just wipe it off, but you see how it kind of brings out that embossed stencil pattern that I had on there. It's just adding a little bit more shadow to it, and I just wanted it in the corner. So you can see I'm going to go back several times. I'm building it up little by little. I'm not happy with that kind of gray splotch that I have going on in the middle. So now I have a shimmer in kind of a golden yellow that matches what I have going on, pulling in some pink as well. And again, pulling up those paper towels, and it successfully kind of brought some of that black down. I will end up painting over some of that black, but putting it down there in the bottom took it out of that bottom area, and that's what I really like. So I'm adding it here again in the corner. I'm trying to just darken up the corners to get some cool shading, and I'm pretty pleased with how it turns out. All right, this is one of my favorite stencils. It's actually from Illustrated Faith. It was part of one of their devotional kits in 2019. And I'm gonna come through, this is some Jane Davenport white. It's actually a pretty translucent white. I'm just gonna use my finger and push it through the stencil. I am looking for a white paint that will work really well through stencils. The white paints that I have in my stash tend to be pretty translucent, and I want it to be bolder, and so I kind of have to build this one up. It works out pretty well because it's not too harsh. Because it's just translucent, it adds a nice thin layer. You can see right there some of it's built up a little bit, so it's not overbearing, but I still wish I had a white paint in my stash that would just cover all the things. So if you have one that you love, can you let me know below, because I'd love to look it up and play with it in my art journaling. As you know, I like to do things in sets of 3 a lot, so I'm putting that stencil in 3 different places, including overlapping on the girl. When you are doing collage and you're using another artist's pieces in your art journal, it's great to overlap things on top of it. Whether you're overlapping different pieces of tissue paper or color, it just tends to incorporate it more into your page instead of it looking like just a piece of paper that you cut out and stuck on there. It really makes it part of the whole story that you're telling on your art journaling entry. Now remember, between each layer you have to let things dry completely. So I'm using my heat gun, making sure everything is as dry as it can get, and now I'm back with my mermaid markers, and I am going to deal with this splotch in the middle. So I add a good dose of the pink. I think this is the Starfish color, and then I come in with Pirate's Gold, and last I believe that is Blue Bottle maybe? I'm trying to make, you can see it's bigger in the middle and kind of getting less towards the edges. I'm trying to make kind of a triangular fading shape with the pink into the yellow into the blue. And again, you can see how cool it looks with that embossed pattern on there, letting the colors mix a little bit, mix and mingle. And this time, instead of dabbing them all up, I am drying it with liquid still on the paper. And when you do that, you get a very cool edge, kind of like a ring. It just makes a different kind of bolder edge, and you'll see it in some of the close-ups. It makes this color look different than the color that's already in the background, if that makes sense. So in the background, I tended to use my towel, dab it off, really smooth it out. And this one, the edges are just a little rougher. You kind of see the shape that I was going for, and it turns out to be a neat effect. If I don't like the area it goes in, I just come back with my towel and wipe off that area, and then add in another layer until I'm happy with how the color buildup is going. And you can see I'm going right over my girl, right over the acrylic paint that is already there from the stencil, which does not mix, which is awesome. And this is just serving to incorporate that girl even more into the page, which works out really well. And I had to be really patient with my heat gun because I really like the rings that I'm getting, so I don't want to just dab everything. But when you do that, it really does take time, and I'm adding and spritzing with my heat gun already going. It was a lot of fun to do. And like I said, this one took me time, but I am so pleased with the result. It just blew my mind. This is maybe one of my favorite art journal entries that I have ever done. So it looks like time is probably worth it. So this is my Dylusions white paint, and yes, it is a little bit more solid, especially with the technique I'm using. This is just a cotton ball, and I'm tapping it on to kind of cover some of the edges of where that tissue paper is connecting and just bring down the color just a notch. It was a little bit bold. The white is kind of knocking it back just a little bit. It is not, I know it looks like it's more opaque than the other one I'm using and I used previously, and it might be, but it still is not completely opaque. I might just have to go with a white paint pen, I guess, maybe, I'm not sure. So anyway, using this white, like I said, to knock it back just a little bit. I like the texture that the cotton ball adds, kind of like a cloud feel, but without being literal clouds. And again, I like how it looks over the embossing and the stenciling. Okay, last stencil, last layer, I guess you might say, and this is some dimensional paint. It is from Art Anthology, and I usually hit up her booth when I go to the Scrapbook Expo every year, and I love her stuff. I'm using my hands. I should get some more tools. I use my hands a lot. I never really realized, but so I'm using my hands, pushing the paint through the stencil. This is dimensional acrylic, so it will dry. If you build it up, it will dry with dimension. It's not just going to bleed out, which is great for pushing through stencils and using in your art journaling. And I really like hers because it doesn't dry feeling sticky, which is nice. So I'm coming around, covering the edges, trying to get it in all the little holes. If I used a tool, I'd probably be a little more successful in getting it in all the places, but I tend to use the tools that I have, which means using my hands. So imperfect stencil impression, but that fits with what I have going on the page. I try to put it a little thicker on the heart that I include up here, and you can see some of it does kind of smush underneath the stencil. I got a little bit impatient because, like I said, I'd already been working on this for a while and I was wanting to see it wrap up, so it smushed under a little bit. No big deal. And I will repeat my grouping of 3 and add a third heart over here in the corner, and I try to be a little bit more patient so this heart comes out just a little bit clearer. Once again, after I add paint, it's important to let it dry, and so I pull out my heat tool, make sure it's really dry, and I've gone over to my typewriter and I'm going to add my phrase or my title for this art journal entry, and it is a phrase that says, "I can, I will, watch me," which I think perfectly describes the attitude of this particular girl that is on my page. And it is an attitude that I like to have, an attitude of confidence. So I can, I will, watch me. I have been loving using my We Are Memory Keepers typewriter. I've been wanting one forever. I finally got one at Christmas, and it's so fun. So I use some Elmer's glue because I know adhesive with all of the things I have going on this page just won't work, my tape runner adhesive. So using some Elmer's glue, adding this on, and as I'm adding it, I'm realizing that it looks kind of, I don't know, it doesn't quite work. It's so stark white and there's so much going on the page that I feel like it doesn't quite work. So what I end up doing is I'm going to bring a micron pen, add some messy lines around it, which helps because it kind of messes it up a little bit. You'll see I'm trying to shift things. I put it on it, they weren't totally straight, which is fine. That's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. So adding in the micron pen, and then I end up deciding that I need to knock back that white a little bit. So I grab one of my foam applicators that I used with Distress Oxide inks, and I just kind of go over the top really lightly. Just see, I didn't even put it in ink. I just knew that there was probably some residual ink on there. Add it to the top. It knocks down the color. It actually smears a little bit of the paint on it, which I don't mind. I like the imperfect look. And otherwise, that art journal entry is done. I'll pull it up here so you can see some of the shimmer and dimension that is on the page. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider hitting that subscribe button as well as the bell notification button. Also, as a heads up, I have a new email list where I email out tips and tricks and organization hacks every couple of weeks. So if you're interested in joining that, check out the link below. I hope you have a fantastic day, and as always, keep it creative.